I'm Vincent Corsello from Corsello Butcheria. Corsello Butcheria is a local whole animal butcher shop in East Hampton, Massachusetts. So we source locally and we produce in-house. We buy the whole animal. We have what I call the 5 pillars, our philosophy, our vision: quality, local, transparency, simplicity, and connection.
Hi, I'm Kasey Corsello. I'm co-owner of Corsello Butcheria, which is a small family-owned whole animal butcher shop in East Hampton, Massachusetts. We are a brick and mortar, and we were inspired by our time living in Italy, Rome, Italy, and we really wanted to bring the experience of being in Italy, the experience of shopping at markets, the experience of being friends with our butcher, to the valley, and really utilizing the small farms, the local farms, bringing connection to people's food, and really offering meat in a very sustainable, humanely raised way. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, great. Oh, like you got me at Italy. You just got me. Like that was a hook right there. Oh my goodness. Thank you very much for being here. I mean, I'm really excited because I discovered you because I order my food from a butcher. I mean, so it's a butcher box is what I get my food from. But when I was younger, my mother, I mean, back in the day, my mother got paid once a month, and that once a month she did all the food shopping for the month. And we would order food from the butcher. We lived in Cambridge, and then we moved to Brockton. But she'd go back to Cambridge when we were younger, and she'd have her cow. She'd have everything ordered, and the butcher got everything ready to go. And she came home, cleaned it, seasoned it, and then everything was in the freezer ready to go. So I grew up that way, and being first generation born in America, when we go back to Haiti, where we're from, we get to like see the animals in the backyard. And then we like, what are we having? We look in the backyard, like what's there? So just for you to say that, that's huge. So amazing. But I'm so excited to talk about that. But I don't want to even talk about the business yet. I don't want to talk about the business or anything.
Yeah.
I want people to get to know who you are. So where are you and what's your story first before the business?
Well, so it's kind of interesting. You know, Italy informs almost everything that I do. And I moved to Rome, and it's a funny story because I moved there.
Wait. Before you weren't just born and you moved. So
I know. Okay. Yes.
We want to know the story.
I mean, you want the whole story?
Are.
The whole story. I mean, yeah. I am. Well, I was born in Texas. I moved here when I was 9 to Massachusetts, which is in some ways a culture shock. And I moved from, I would say, kind of a bigger town, maybe 30, 40,000, to a town that had 800 people. It had a commune. So I went from just a certain worldview in Texas to, being in, I'll say, a hippie town in Massachusetts. And in 4th grade, having an accent, you lose those things very quickly when kids point that out to you. So then I spent a lot of time in Massachusetts, and I think my formative years were in here. So
well, all right. So it's funny because we have many kindred spirits here. So I'm first generation born in here. My mom was 8.5 months pregnant when she came to America. Raised in New England. I started my college career at the University of Houston. So
what?
Exactly. And so I went there, and no exaggeration. My parents were like, I wanted to go to the University of Southern California, and they wouldn't let me go that far. So I got into University of Houston. My mother, get this is another little hook. My mother and my grandmother were in Italy for the summer. And I was mama's girl. And I got into the school, and my dad's like, you'll never go. You're obsessed with your mother. I'm going to go. I'm going to be on my own. And I went to my mother and my grandmother flew in on Saturday night. I flew out on Sunday morning without having a gap. And when I say culture shock in Houston,
yeah,
like Like I went to, I mean, people had told me about Texas. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. I literally told them I'm going to go to Texas because I want to prove to the world that there's no white black thing. And everyone's like, really? Really? Okay, that's going to be. And I went there and I'm like, oh my God. I go, they're like, you're a Yankee. I go, no, I love the Red Sox. What are you talking about?
I know, right?
I had no idea. It was, I mean, it literally was I think I cried every single day for a year because I was just like I was overwhelmed with the fact that everything was just so different than what I was used to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had that when I moved to Italy. I mean, talk about a mama's girl. I went to University of Massachusetts, so I didn't go that far. I was like 30 minutes away from where I grew up. Seemed like it was very far to be away from my parents. I would still go home and do laundry, and they were my people. I really needed them. And then when I said, much like your father, when I said I'm moving to Rome, Italy, about a few years after I had graduated college, they really didn't think I would do it because I said a lot of grandiose things, right? And then it never really came to fruition. But the day had come for me to move, and it was like, oh, she's really doing this thing. And I cried a lot. Because that transition, I wasn't just in another country, I was in another language, but I was a country mouse, right? In the big city. I wasn't comfortable with taking public transportation.
But you went from Texas to New England. One would assume that Texas would come out of you all over again, or was it just like, was it gone, or just like erased or dimmed, I should say?
Well, so I think that, it depends on how the kind of like when things are formed. I think we're more pliable at 10, right? And then in those years from 10, like adolescence to, let's say, young adult, are really what kind of forms our identity, is what I believe. So I thank my parents that we moved from Texas, because I know, and I don't mean to bring up politics, but I know my politics would be very different. But what was interesting when I moved to Massachusetts were the teachers that I had in 4th and 5th grade were incredibly passionate. In Texas, I just learned about Texas history. I mean, it's like, think about how small.
No, I mean, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you probably were coming to in people who you were meeting, right? It was. And then here I had teachers that were very passionate about the civil rights movement, and they were activists, and I had learned about things that I'd never, like Jim Crow, the slave trade.
Well, not even just like global history. I mean, I think that's one of the things where when I was at University of Houston, I was like, but I mean, being first generation born here, I'm like, there's other countries here, and it was very shocking to me. Where you're right, Texas is the largest state, and it was very, very focused. And I mean, and mind you, if I ended up in the University of Houston, if I had gone to Austin, I would have never come back. Austin is awesome.
I know. And that's what I say. I said I was born and I lived in Texas until I was 10, and I did not live in Austin. That's what I tell people.
Yeah, exactly. Because Austin really is such a different realm of everything that most people know or have experienced in Texas.
Yeah, and I think that I haven't been back there in a while, and I think that it's changing, right? But I think that the beautiful thing about this country, and then I didn't necessarily find it in Italy, is that there is so many different cultures here, right? Like, and when we can really be open and open to learn from each other, that it could create something really magical.
Absolutely. And the thing is, for me, like when I was, after my Texas experience, I moved to Australia for a year, and everyone's like, why? I'm like, because the East Coast and being North and South just in my mind didn't mesh anymore. Something was just like not balancing out. So being in Australia was like a nice moment of me balancing myself back to like who I was, because then you're like in Australia. And at the time when I lived in Australia, there was the discrimination against Aborigines. And I'm like, oh, it's not just the United States, it's everywhere. Like everyone just, and not that it's good, but it was really interesting to see how it was done there and how the government was dealing with it. I'm like, I go, this is really amazing. But family and friends are number one priority over jobs. So then you're looking at one thing, but then you're looking at another thing. You're like, okay, I need to travel to more places. And that was for me the moment where I just kept on going from place to place and seeing how people saw themselves and saw each other in other countries.
Yeah, and I love that perspective too, because when we are immersed in an environment or a culture,
yeah,
as really observer, not the judge, but like kind of being in it, it can I believe it changes our DNA, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
We'll never be the same. And in Italy, what was really amazing is that my daughter was born there,
mm-hmm.
and there was a sense of freedom for me because I could kind of pick and choose. There was this smorgasbord of advice. Like, I was in an expat community, so I had friends that were from, England, Austria, mm-hmm. Colombia, Spain, in a number of different places.
Wait, but I want to rewind a little bit because I'm a little bit, because we're jumping a little bit too much where I'm there's a gap missing where. So you decided to go to school there. So no. Okay, so when you tell your parents you're moving, so you go to UMass Amherst. So I was just assuming that you were there as a international student. So that's where the gap was missing. So
here's the gap.
Fill in.
Okay, so I graduated from UMass.
Mm-hmm.
I got my dream job. I was working in big pharma. I was kind of living the life as a 24-year-old single girl. And I wrote myself as a girl because and I was earning, more money that I had imagined that I would, and being independent. And, what took me to Italy it was more of a vacation, is that I had a friend who was also an ex-colleague who had moved over there. Mm-hmm. And I went to visit, and it was in that moment that we kind of connected and the possibility of being more than friends was there. So a relationship started, which was very strange. So he's now my husband, but he had moved there as he left his job in pharma, and then he was like, I want to experience life. And he was 30. So he had he had a career. He had a very successful career, but there was something that was missing, and it was this really fulfillment and wanting to kind of be curious and to get back to his roots, because he has Italian heritage. Mm-hmm. And so then when I went to visit, the things had connected between us. And then, it was like, well, I guess either I could move there or you can move here. And then it was determined because we were sitting by the pond one night, and we saw a shooting star, and I was like, well, if I see 7 shooting stars, then I will move to Rome. And I did.
No way.
It happened to be a meteor shower, but I didn't know that. But it was still like, okay, the universe is sending me to Italy, and that's what was determined.
All right, so that's all right. I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty cool story. So now so at this time, did both of you guys just you quit your jobs? You're there, or are you still working for pharma? And he decides to quit his job.
He had quit his job. His job the year before. We hadn't spoken to each other until I said, hey, I want to go for a European vacation, with the hopes of meeting an Italian man.
You put it out to the universe will hear.
It will hear. It's not the way that I had envisioned it, because he wasn't the one, but he was the one, right? And so so then I was still working, and then I left my job 6 months later. So it was this process of getting a visa, finding a school to learn the language, because I didn't know the language, and it was hard. It was hard. I had a young niece and nephew who were really my life at the time. Uh-huh. And it was almost like the separation from them was probably the hardest thing that I ever did. And I moved, and probably like you cried, I cried a lot too. So but what it was continuing to ground, because every time I just remember when I landed and I got off the train in Rome, there was a sense of belonging for me, and there was a sense that I had been here before. So it felt like home that first time. And I came back to that over and over. When things were hard, it was like, okay, I'm doing this. And I was like, I'm going to do it for 6 months. And then 6 months turned into 5 years. So
that's perfect. Okay. So now like this, and so you guys aren't married yet, or are you? You're not
we're
married
not
yet.
married yet. No.
Okay. You're not married yet. You guys survived 5 years without a pandemic, and you stayed together in Italy.
We stayed together, right? And we did get married the year later or 2 years later. And then we had I had my daughter there, which was navigating a healthcare system, navigating a new language, and then becoming a mother there. So I had to use resources that I didn't think I had, because I never really believed in myself. But in the process, there was I was really empowering myself.
Yep.
Because I had to.
You had no choice.
I had no choice.
A little person who was very dependent on you. Like when you're a couple, it's one thing, because we'll just figure it out, go with the flow. We have each other. But now a little person's dependent on you, and you need the system to help you navigate this little person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that what was really helpful was having a community and support. And
how was your Italian, by the way, at that point?
It was good. It didn't take me long. So it's funny because I had, the American French that I studied French in high school, and I studied it in college, but there's not an opportunity to really speak it. But having the grammar and having that foundation of actually learning another language was incredibly helpful. I picked it up pretty easily, to where my husband, who had been there longer than me, plus he's like blonde and blue-eyed, they'd always come to me for directions, and I would just, tell them. But what was really, I remember that I really got it when I could translate. My parents had come to visit one summer, and I was translating for them in real time. And I was like, oh, wow, I have it.
Well, the biggest fear is most people try. I mean, I always say that I would love to learn at least 2 or 3 different languages. My dad knew a lot of languages. My mother she had the ear where she can see, she could pronounce it so well. And my mother always said, she's like, you don't put yourself in a situation to learn. She's like, I go, because learning off of an app is not the same thing as being there. And so you being there and having to navigate everything, it's so much clearer than versus like you're on an app and you're like reciting things to yourself where no one is talking back to you.
And it becomes the cadence of your life, right? Like the immersion of it. And this is true for any learning experience, is that you learn through experience, and then it becomes the embodied learning, so that it's like you don't have to think about it. And I think with languages, we're always thinking in our language to translate it, and that has to totally go out of your head, because you're not learning to translate. You're learning to understand the sense of what's being said in the context. And then it's like, because then you get the cadence, because it's not when we don't speak, we don't think and then we speak usually, right? We're just kind of speaking in real time.
Well, it's funny. It's just like the concept of listening, where so many people are so in a rush to talk, and I'm like, and listening is the hardest thing to do for a lot of us. And so, because you're excited about talking, but sometimes you're just like, the listening part will empower you to sit there and like really understand what's happening, leaps and bounds. And so that's the same exact thing. Although, French is my first language. I had to learn how to speak English when I was younger, and I still find myself thinking in French before I say it in English.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and I think
little things.
And again, they say with children, when those first 3 years of language, it's your mother tongue, and Absolutely. So that will come first, right? That was your language first.
Okay, so now you get married, you have you have a child. Do you just have one?
We have 2.
You have 2. Okay, both of them born in Italy, or one here and one in Italy?
Well, there's a connection here because, like your mother, we came over here when I was 8 months pregnant with my son. Because I was like, this is the last time I can fly. We've got to go. And what had happened was there. So it was a transformative experience, and I was really feeling incredibly free because I was connected to presence. You know, there's a level of presence when you are turned upside down, right? Because everything is new, and there is a curiosity there if we choose it, right? Because there could be this fear can totally get in the way and then create that block. So there, after being there for 5 years, there was a need. You talk about family. I really wanted to be near my family. I was missing my mother. And my mother, mind you, who really hadn't, you know, she traveled a little bit, but she ended up coming to Italy 6 times on her own. And I was so proud of her for that. You know, it was just a really amazing experience. And so coming back, there was this need to be really surrounded more in a community. And I had this probably false belief that I wasn't necessarily belonging, because I've now learned that, you know, we can belonging can be created within ourselves, right? Like we can belong to ourselves, and then we're not dependent on what's going on the outside.
So wait, so do you not feel that you were connected to Italy, the community, or when you came back home?
So there's a little bit of both, but I think what happened is that as my daughter started to age, it was more about what would the experience be like for her. You know, having probably very similar for you as a first generation American, but I had this narrative in my head that like she would never fit in.
So see, like I think that's one of the things where parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, we go by our own personal experiences. Kids are resilient. She would have been
totally are.
Like she would have come out and she would have been totally fine and she would have had no problem whatsoever. But it's like once we have something in our heads, it's like we go with it.
We do. And I think that I am glad that we moved back, frankly. If we were living in Italy right now, it would be really hard. It would be incredibly hard.
I have friends in Italy right now they're like, we are in lockdown. I mean, it's a game. I mean, and continuously going back in and out. So yeah, a lot of my friends a few of them that I've interviewed on the podcast have said, they're like, well, we're still here. Just like we're allowed to go for exercising. We're allowed to go for food. But after that, we're in our houses. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. And we'll be back someday. I mean, I feel like someday we'll be back. The dream is to have a house there, and because it's just part of us. But I think at the time, and you know, I really wanted my children to know their cousins. But when you said, was it hard to come back here? It was incredibly hard to come back here because we were different. And so how did we fit in, or how did we belong? And I think I was looking to belong, and it still felt kind of weird, you know?
All right. So we're going to go back to that, but let's rewind. So now you came back, you're not working for farm anymore. Your husband's not working for farm anymore. You're back in the States. What do you do?
So my husband, there was an opportunity for him. He started a whole new career as a project manager there. And
where's there?
Rome, in Rome.
Okay.
And actually he was working for an American company, and it's you know, the universe is great. It's supporting. And so he ended up getting a job where he could work from home here. And so it had the flexibility that we didn't necessarily have to be in any physical place connected to a job. So we ended up moving back close to my parents and finding a really lovely community in East Hampton. And but I think there was in Italy, there was a thing called contratto indeterminato, which means that you can never be fired. And here you're an at-will employee.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So that can mess a little bit with this sense of security. I think that's what my husband had, Now we had some success and there was stability, and I was able to stay home with the kids. And then he and I had, after a couple of years of being here, and things were really hard. They were hard between us. We were not necessarily getting along.
Yep.
It was hard to be parents to little ones. And it just, we weren't necessarily connected really or in alignment with the things that we hold near and dear.
Yep.
So there felt like there was this, I'll say like a kind of a spiritual piece that had been missing, or just like a connected piece. So my husband and I, somebody had told us about this leadership development that was, you know, a process, and three different levels. And
Yep.
when we both did it together, and it actually really opened up and created this awareness, and then the transformation in that we could take risks. So if there was a dream or there was a vision, that anything is possible.
It's so funny that you even say that in regards of you went through this process to find out that you could take risks. Both of you left the country and went to Italy. You were risk takers already. And then there's a moment of your time that you became stagnant and you needed help to remind you of who you were.
Yeah. And we felt stuck, right? We felt stuck. My husband felt stuck. He was like, it's not, I'm here working from home. I don't have kind of this camaraderie with my colleagues. Every day I'd go out for coffee and we'd have these long lunches, and it was just la dolce vita.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was the same for me. Right. So it's also, it's like when you think of the grass as being greener, it's not always greener on the other side. Unless you actually change inside of yourself. Right. And so that with this training and this experience that we had, we were able to really shift the gravity, because we had been really dependent on the things that were happening on the outside for our happiness, right? If I have this, then I can be happy. And that's not, you know, we've come to believe and to experience that's not the case. So it really was like finding our power center, connecting to who we really are authentically.
Yep.
And then making choices and decisions from that space. Like, what inspires us? What are we passionate about? And, you know, not necessarily having it be in a prescribed way or a limited way, not limiting ourselves.
So you could have decided to own an ice cream shop. You could have just got like a gelato shop. I mean, you could have decided to, I don't know, like make clothes, Italian clothing. You could have decided so much. Why meat?
You're so right. And actually when my husband, so I will tell you, the first time, you know, our butcher in Rome, they were our friends. And the first time that we went to their stall, it's in an open air market, my husband's eyes were like his body was lifted, you know, he just was like, his eyes were so big. He was so curious, and he was just like in love. And there was a rapport. So they were curious, like, why are these two Americans moving to Rome, right? Everybody leaves. And we were like, my husband specifically was like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? What is that? How do you cook? And because it had things in the whole muscle, let's say, or it had the whole animal that you could see hanging there. And that was like, for him, he was like, you know, I feel like he comes from like a totally different lifetime too, right? But he was so passionate about it. And then we learned recipes. We learned, like, there's such a, I'll say, a sacredness that comes from food. And this is in many cultures. I'm sure it's in your culture as well.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
You know, there is an intentional act. It is an act with love, right? Which is missing in our country, in the US, I'll say, because we are consumer, right? We're consumer, we're convenience, we want it quick. When we slow down, it creates a different experience. And so he had this vision and this dream, and I was like, what? No, right? Because I went immediately to, how is that going to work? I don't really want to be touching meat. That's why I went immediately to that. I'm like, I don't want to touch meat and cut it. Like, I just don't want to do that.
Well, and you, I mean, like the first description of when you were describing what you guys do, whole meat. Like, I mean, you have the whole animal.
We do.
How, I mean, touching meat is one thing where like, okay, I get my meat, I'm cleaning it. I mean, we're on the lemon, like the vinegar, we're cleaning it before we cook it and spice it. But you're talking about the entire body of the animal. How was that for you, Miss Texas, which made sense, but now in Massachusetts doesn't make sense?
Well, it's interesting too, because my parents are from the Midwest, so farming is in the blood. And for me, it was I'll say that the idea, so there is a respect for the food. And I think the reason why we did the whole animal is because it's important that we don't throw
anything away.
There's so much that's wasted.
Mm-hmm.
And but I had to kind of get it right within my heart that this is what we were going to be doing, because we are taking a life, right?
Yep.
We're ending a life. And so I'm like thinking of the emotions about it. I made myself go to a slaughterhouse, and I had to witness what was happening. It was important for me because there was tension, or there was a sense of nervousness or a hesitation because of the life that that was going to be given in order to feed others. And so I needed to see how that was done.
How was your first, how was the first time you went? How was that? Because when I'm in Haiti and things are being prepared for us, I don't see that. I see the animal that's alive, and then I see the food on our table. I see the skinning. I mean, so I've never witnessed the death. Fish, I've seen the fish, the different ways. I hate the way that certain people kill seafood, and I am in Japan. It's done so well and so seamlessly that I'm like, oh, I'm okay with it here. So, because like in Japan, they feel like the way that you kill the animal, the fish, etc., is it will torment your food. So it's very ritual in Japan. So how was it for you when you first saw it, and how did you have that moment where you're like, I'm okay with what I'm doing?
Well, I will say, coming back to like slaughtering on the farm, that animal doesn't go anywhere. They don't know anything. They're not. There's not the angst of actually leaving the farm and then going to someplace that they don't know.
Yep.
And it is a humane way to do it, right? And I think that's really what we need to be getting back to, as opposed to like the factory farming.
Yep.
But what it was for me, it was so hard. I cried so much because I still get emotional thinking about it, but I was just like, to witness it was heavy. It was heavy, but it was important, because I think that when we can witness, let's say pain, there wasn't pain.
Yep.
The animal was not even aware, but to witness the heaviness and I think the gravity of what's happening, it allows it to be real and to pay a respect to what it is that we're doing. And I left feeling like, if we are going to do this thing, we cannot waste a single thing. We cannot be haste in what we do. We have to be incredibly intentional, because this. And when I see a recall on ground beef that's like millions of pounds, I weep for those animals. Yeah. Because it's disgusting. And
it's human error.
It's human error. It's human error. Yeah. And so it made it more real and more important to get it right. And so that's like our business model is that everything is processed in-house. It's processed. It's a small scale.
Yep.
We grind the meat there. We break down the animals, and they come in, quarters for the beef and halves for pigs, and it just is like it made it really important to get it right.
you're here in the States though. You could have gone the route of a regular butcher shop. Why the Italian? I mean, obviously I'm hearing because you were in Italy, but you could have gone the easy route of just having a typical butcher shop.
Yeah, so the difference I'll say as well is that in the meat market, most things are come in it comes in boxes. It's like kind of the whole muscle and it's boxed. And there is a national meat market, and many of the animals are just they're raised in feedlots. You know, they're fed so they can get bigger and then they can be slaughtered. And what we saw this year with the pandemic is that that's not sustainable, especially if there's a pandemic one. And it's kind of the inhumane treatment of the people in the plant that are processing it. Many people are, we found that many of them are undocumented
Employees.
And they're not treated well. So there was like, it was kind of awful that they were going to be forced to go into working conditions that were risking their lives as well.
Well, all right. So I mean, the pandemic basically showed us on many levels, and I mean, I'm sure you saw it in Texas and all the lines of people that were waiting for food. I have interviewed people in other countries, especially in Africa, the continent, where their food is like, I mean, they're constantly thinking about it. It's not just because of the pandemic; they're constantly thinking about, we have all these countries in this one continent, and we have a food shortage. And so when you're thinking about, I mean, I want you to talk about the concept of starting a business, getting into a business that you were unaware of. I mean, I go high, college educated, pharmaceutical, the whole entire thing. Now you're going to the business that you're not aware of. But then like you're in a pandemic right now. And so, and we're hearing about how every single time another processing center is closed down because a lot of people in their staff have COVID. That's it, touching our foods. So, and then you're going to supermarkets, and the supermarket, same thing, where supermarkets are closing down because like 2 or 3 people have COVID, they had to close down the entire supermarket. So that's another food source, and food that's there that's now going to be spoiled because they have to close down a supermarket. So what is important? I mean, so how was it to start this business? And how was it for you during the pandemic? So I want you to take some time and talk about this. Because I'm looking at the time, I'm like, oh my God, we've covered so much, and the time is like limited now.
Yeah.
But I want you to talk about how was it to start this business, knowing that this was not your lane. How was it during the pandemic, knowing that you were seeing over and over all over the news about all these supermarkets, all these like processing centers, just people being scared, and we're trapped at home, but we want to eat. So yeah. I want to hear from you.
So the starting of the business, I think, because we had these tools, right? We had emotional intelligence. I think we were aware of we worked a resilience muscle, and taking the experience of going to another country, taking risks, having faith that it'll work out, right? And if it doesn't, it doesn't, right? You can always, whatever. There's kind of like that safety net, but not safety net. I mean, not in finances. I mean, but it's more like, okay, worst case scenario is that it doesn't work. But I think that the thing that worked is being connected to a vision. And so our vision is connection, transparency, simplicity, local, and sustainability. And when we were in doubt, or when, anytime you're doing something, and we were very humbled that it was a learning process. So we didn't pretend to know what we didn't know. And I think that both of us were aware of that and accepted that fact. And we also were kind of on opposite ends. So one of us would be nervous and kind of freaking out a little bit, while the other one would be grounded and stable and could be the listening board or the sounding board, and being like, well, what about this? What about this? And so I think that we had enough, I'll say, emotional intelligence, so that we could tap into the tools to move through the difficult moments, to move through the fear, to move through the uncertainty. right? Because being an entrepreneur and having a business, it is uncertain, right? And to also remember and to trust our own process, that just because we didn't do things in the way you're supposed to do it, in the prescribed way, we were still successful. And then, so we utilized our tools. And then, like, flash forward to pandemic time. Right before the pandemic was hard for us, because we were like, are we going to close? Can we even sustain this thing? Because it was almost like we were ahead of our time, because people were going out to eat all the time. And there was this convenience factor of, going to the supermarket, and people didn't know, what are you, right? I think we were trying to figure out our identity.
Well, all right. So it's very interesting that you just even mentioned the fact that pre-pandemic, it was a concern of, do we stay open or not? Because you have a Whole Foods, and people were going to a Stop and Shop, which is our local supermarkets here, market baskets, and they're seeing the meat. But then you're going to a Whole Foods where the meat looks prettier, and it's like a little bit like, I go, ooh. Then you go to a Trader Joe's, and so I felt like before the pandemic started, people were swaying towards a Whole Food and a Trader Joe's, because the food had sustainability attached to it, the name sustainability attached to it. So people were swaying away from that. And then that's when a lot of the food plants were getting, you were hearing about people getting sick all the time. So I'm very surprised that you're even saying that you didn't know if you were going to survive or not pre-pandemic.
Yeah, because I think that, when you kind of have to create value, and this is where, having it done again, we would have had our customer, right? Our avatar and all these different things. But there's also something about patience and the right timing, and then having resource support partners. We worked with some business consultants, and one of them said, no, it's like 3 to 5 years. She kept saying 3 to 5 years, because we would then go into judgment on ourselves and say, well, we're not doing it right, and this is never going to happen. And she kept saying, I just kept hearing 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And my husband had prayed for a miracle. I had been meditating on doing Deepak Chopra's abundance meditation. I kid you not. It was like his 21-day meditation. And then COVID hit. And so, which for me, the way that, I tend to be more anxious, and I was so afraid, because I was like, are we going to have to close? Are you going to get sick? Am I going to get sick? Are the kids going to get sick? Then we're going to have to close. Our operation is very small. We are small with our employees. And I think because of that, we stayed open the entire time. And our practices were such that we were safe. And we kind of had the pod for the employees, right? Because their safety was like of utmost importance as well. And it was just an interesting time of uncertainty. And I think because we had just been in the practice of it for 3 years of uncertainty and having to redefine what success is, right? Okay, success is that we had 20 people come in today. Success is that we had 5 people that came in and we connected, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't defined on our numbers, that we were able to really kind of pivot and shift operations. We did curbside pickup. We put things online. We had always wanted to do these meat shares, which were like, 10 and 20 pounds, that like your mother would go shop for the month so people could come. They wouldn't have to come in, but then they'd have the meat that sustained them. And everyone was cooking, right? It was almost like, this is why we're here. This was our vision. We wanted to encourage people to cook and to do it locally and sustainably. And because you're not just, when you shop from us, you support the farmer and his family and those kinds of things. So it really is about like the community as well.
I love how, because you just did a great job of hitting all the major points there. Awesome. Where in regards of the hardships of being an entrepreneur, and we're taking risks and being afraid. I mean, being an entrepreneur is not an easy task. I mean, when we decide to go this route, we are already risk takers, but we live in the world of fear. And that fear drives us, which is absolutely insane. And it's insane because most people are like, why would you do that to yourself? You're highly educated. You can get any job. And you're like, because you want to change the world. In your way, you want to change the world, which I love how you talked about that. I love that. My favorite thing that you just said was like the level of success. Like our marker for success wasn't about financials. It was like, we had 20 people come in today. Like, I mean, that right there is huge because people automatically assume as an entrepreneur, you're like, it's money. You're Mark Zuckerberg, you're Jeff Bezos. And I'm like, well, Jeff lived in his garage for quite some time. And so those moments of success where you're coding something and it works and it didn't crash, or when people are coming through your door, or when people say, yes, Jodi, I will do your podcast. Those are moments of success. And people are just assuming I only am successful when I make the money. And I always tell people, forget about the ROI and focus on the ROO, because return on objective is more, it's more sustainable and it gets you through the next day, to the next day, the next day, versus return on investment. Then you're obsessed with this, like, I didn't make the money. I'm like, breathe. It will come.
Yeah. And I think what's really important, and, I also am an entrepreneur coach. It's not being attached to the outcome or the results, right? Yep. And it's about the process. It's always about the process. People are like, okay, well, if oddly enough, when we hit the 3-year mark, like we grew so much, but again, it was like, okay, holding on for certain markers, because of course we have to do things to create and to grow and be in action about it. But it's how you do those things. Yeah. It's what is the driver. When you talk about fear as a driver and scarcity begets fear and scarcity. It's this idea of not enough. And so certainly it's motivating and it's energizing, but we're just really creating from scarcity, which it'll never be enough. If you create from your vision and purpose and sort of this abundance of infinite possibilities, the results that you're gonna get and what returns back to you are those things.
Absolutely. How was it during the pandemic for you and having the team? Like, so you have the business, your partner in crime is your husband. You have little kids at home that are now needing you because they're home in your house in the pandemic. You have a team of individuals helping you grow your business. How were you able to balance all of that?
So I did not go in. So my support of the business was not customer support, was not operations. It was marketing. It was applying for PPP. It was applying for grants. We saw an opportunity to take SNAP EBT because everybody, many people were being laid off, and access to good food. It's important. And so I started to look for opportunities and ways that I could support and kind of be working on the business, which I hadn't done. So I was empowered by that. And it was, okay, so I'm going to do my part here. Kids are at home. They are, now I'm back to mothering full time. And, but what it did was, again, I never wanted to be cutting meat. So it actually allowed me to be doing the things that I wanted to do, and then focus on my career, my business as a coach, also supporting entrepreneurs. I'm working with our mayor doing economic development. So it allowed me to grow myself through this pandemic, as well as be very supportive of my children through this time. Because, as you know, like people together all the time, 24/7, it's a lot. And so I had to use a lot of tools to keep my calm in the house.
Well, look, when we were younger, my mother would go on vacation without us. They would go away. Literally, they would go away without us. They would go away with us, and we would go to camp. You can't miss me if you're always here. That's the way I was taught. You can't miss me if you're always here. And so during a pandemic, you were always here, but I saw families being creative in regards of each person's going in their own space. And although we're under the same roof or in the same location, we're still able to have our time. And for some people it worked and some people it didn't work, but that was one of those moments of how do you juggle? And so having your time and developing what you could do for the business, when you just said it empowers you, I think that's one of the things that people didn't see. And they're probably seeing it now. They're feeling they needed to be together all the time. And that's when you were like realizing either I married well or I didn't.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's an opportunity. And I think of it as an opportunity to always connect to consciousness and to wake up, because it's for us to, it's how we relate to or respond to our circumstances, right? And having all this close time, if I'm getting frustrated or annoyed or whatever, that's not about the people outside of me. That's about me. And what is that about? And what is that opportunity? And I think also in terms of expectations, I let go of a lot of expectations. You know, there were days, I think for a lot of people, that we were in our pajamas, or, you know, my kids would just kind of like eat on the go. My daughter, I let her paint a mural on our wall in our living room.
Hey, that's art class. That's good.
And a big one, right? Because I was just like, you know what? Do what you want to do. You know, there's
Wait, how old is she?
She's 11. She's almost 12.
She must have loved it when you said yes.
She loved it. She loved it. And then she did not like it anymore, because then she was, you know, I mean, her identity and the judgment and all that stuff, you know? Yeah. So it gave me, you know, we were on the go all the time. Yeah. My daughter played on 2 basketball teams. My son played, like, we were nonstop, and it actually allowed us to breathe. Mm-hmm. And it allowed, I think it was great, because if my husband and I had actually been quarantined together, it may be a different story. But it allowed me to support in the way that I've always wanted to support, using my skills. And then it allowed him to thrive, because what had happened in the beginning is that I'd always be in the kind of judgment about how he did things. And so I just was like, I'm letting go of the control. And I hadn't been in for 2 months at one point. And I went in, I was like, it is beautiful in here, right? Yay! I was like, you guys it's so amazing. And that felt good. I didn't have to do anything.
Which I love that. So I go, without you even realizing you're just giving gold, letting people do what they do best without criticizing, without being on top of them, without micromanaging. And I was saying this at the beginning, where there's a lot of companies that they don't want, it's not that they don't miss their employees. They don't need their employees to go back because their employees are producing amazing things. And some people are like scratching their heads wondering why. I'm like, well, the micromanager isn't there on top of someone. And that person is now in their own happy world, and they're creating, and they're able to do their jobs and be very, very effective.
Yes. And
without feeling the stress.
It's inspiring agency and ownership. Yeah. Which then allows for creativity and productivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if we're micromanaged, we're in the space of like fear, right? It's like, oh, and then there's just no freedom to try different things, or like the freedom to fail, let's say.
Freedom to fail. I like that. 2 more questions. Where do you believe the food industry, the meat industry, is going to go after the pandemic? Like we saw, really, we have seen onion layers come off on so many things in this country. We're seeing layers of onions all over the world. Mm-hmm. Where does the meat industry go from here when we all open again?
Well, I think it's a really good question, because it's like, where do we go, right? We've had this experience. We have this awareness. We've seen the dysfunction out there in so many systems, right? In so many systems. Yeah. And are we going to choose to do something different, or are we going to continue to do the same thing, expecting different results, which is the definition of insanity?
We are creatures of habit, though. We are creatures of habit by nature.
We are. And so it takes a level of consciousness, I think, of the people to ask for and to demand something different. Yeah. Right? It's going to take people to the demand for it, right, in the market, like the demand for sustainability. You know, when I think of how companies like Amazon, like how much money they made in this pandemic.
It's shocking.
And not, I'm not like, Bezos is a brilliant businessman, right? But there is a level of I think there's a level of this conscious capitalism where we have the stakeholders are important, not just the shareholders. It's like the community stakeholders, the employees, the people that are at the effect of whatever it is that you do in your business, right? You know, climate change, this racial justice piece, all of it, animal justice, right? My hope is that with the awareness, there are more of us that seek out and use our buying power for, you know, the good.
Yeah. I really hope that you're right, because I get my meat to box. So once a month I get my meat delivered to my door. I'm part of a farm share. So three towns that are adjacent, we all have we support specific farms. And last year when I had the two women that actually ran Julie and Tamara run the farm share, the last question I asked was, why are we paying high costs for the farms? Because it's people sway away from farm shares because it's so expensive. And she said what you said, where you're not supporting big business, you're supporting the dancing school for the farmer. You're just supporting the farms. You're supporting their animals. You're supporting them directly. It's like going from you to them, not going through this entire cycle and maybe operations and marketing and all these different things. It's going directly to the farmer.
And we have to remember that there are big subsidies for big agro. There are huge subsidies out there for this, you know, this food supply chain that is not sustainable. So I know that Senator Cory Booker has this kind of farm bill that he wants to, you know, really encourage and subsidize these smaller farms that are doing regenerative farming, because it can be done. You know, I don't think the answer is veganism, right? Like, sure, I think it's a choice, but I don't think that, you know, meat gets a bad rap. Meat is part of this ecosystem, right? I mean, it's the beef eats the grass and they eat the things that are not going to be eaten, right? Like,
no. Like, I mean, the kids learn it as simple as going to be the circle of life. I mean, it's like, I go, we know this. Where for me, whenever someone asks, they're like, you're from the islands, are you vegetarian? I'm like, I go, no, we eat everything. But the key thing is we eat everything. And I'm going to say this. So I'll share a story where I mean, at funerals we have goat soup, and they take the entire head of the goat and they put it in, and it's slow cooked. It's usually just get this during a holiday or funerals is when we get the soup. Amazing.
of course.
And when I tell you it's slow cooked because it's dissolved, the entire head is just put in there, dissolved, and it's amazing soup. And I remember the one time I was drinking the soup, and I took a spoonful, and I was like, okay, I know I'm gonna freak you out right now. I would take a spoonful, and I'm like, I go, oh, this it's a bone. So I'm taking the bone out. I'm looking at the bone, and the bone looked different. There's a rack of teeth. And I'm like, like losing my mind. And my mom's like, did you throw away the soup? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't throw away the soup. The soup was too good. Right. But why would you? She's like, we don't waste. We don't. She was just like, so she laughed at me. She's like, we don't waste. Like, what do you think we were going to do? Just get rid of it? I'm like, and when I went to South Africa, and you have, I have pictures of the pieces of an animal being cut up, and you could buy a whole bowl of eyeballs, you could buy the teeth, you could buy no one wastes in other countries, and we do. We waste, unfortunately.
We do, because I think that it's also, you know, this idea of what is edible or what's in fashion, or, you know, we're really driven by, I'll say, marketing, right? You know, and advertising. And
I'm a marketing person. I know. Yes, I know.
Right? So we're driven, and it's like, oh, you can't eat that, or and ultimately, I think that if you make the choice to eat meat, so for me, when you talk about what's my hope is that more of us are waking up, that there are more of us that are becoming conscious, not just for food, but it's just a level of consciousness in how we are being on this planet. And that we are connected, we are a community, you know, it's like that butterfly effect, right?
Yes.
You know, there's an impact. If you do something here, it's impacted on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And
100%.
And so that's what I hope. And as you know, entrepreneurship, I hope that there is this conscious level of capitalism, that we lift all boats, right? That it's not just some of us have access to the big loans and the grants and, you know, these funding, that there's ways for wealth building through entrepreneurship, and that everybody has a seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Just really very, very, very short answer. Where is Cory Booker with like with the farms? I mean, how close are we to getting this passed, or is it a long road?
I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that there's a huge lobby with big corporate agriculture, and they push out the small farmer. They push out the little guy. Yeah. And when if we continue to vote the way that we vote, right, then that's what you're going to get. But if it's important, and there are a lot of if you think about what's going on locally and in your state, there are it's just to be understanding of what policies are there different bills, are there things that are happening that are supporting your local farms. And there was, with the pandemic, there was a lot of actual federal funding that some of the smaller farmers did get access to. And I think that through some of these recoveries, there's going to be more for them.
Beautiful. All right. So now the funny thing that I've been so scared to say your name, because again, I want to say Kasey, but it's like Cassie.
No, it's Kasey. It's Kasey.
Oh, all right. So I'm like sitting here like I don't want to say her name wrong. Oh my God. Kasey. Okay. So this has been so good, and there's just so much. I mean, there's so much more to you. And I tell everybody, this is not the last conversation. So for everyone that I'm speaking to, you're kind of stuck with me because I'm coming back to you.
I love it.
For other conversations.
I love it.
Because I wanted to get to know who I'm like. People collect warm bodies on LinkedIn. They're like, look at all the people I know on LinkedIn. I'm like, yeah, but you don't know them. I love the fact that I can tell you a story of every single person I've spoken to on this podcast. And I've since this month is like a year of me doing podcasts, and I've interviewed close to 135 people. And wow. I know stories. I know like stories before your business, before your degree. I know stories of you. And that's what I care about the most, because in order to engage with your business, I want to know the person, the humans behind it.
And you're speaking my language, because that's why I coach entrepreneurs, because it's about the human being that is generating what you need to generate to build your business, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
all about that. It's all about that. So I love it. I love it.
Yay. All right. So my favorite questions that I ask everyone, no matter how many times you come on, you'll always know this is the last question. So there's two answers. If you had a personal ask and a professional ask of anyone that's listening to you right now, what would be your personal ask and what would be your professional ask?
So I'm going to say this taps into a very stretchy thing for me, because it's hard to ask for anything for me, right? I'm like, oh.
And I know this of all entrepreneurs and startups and innovators, no one likes to ask, but guess what? If you don't ask, if the universe doesn't hear you, it can't happen. So this is why I'm making it a thing where personal ask, and most people are like, oh, here's my business ask. No, a personal and a professional ask.
So my personal ask is that, for me, it's what lights me up is when people find that spark and the connection back to themselves. So my personal ask is more about, an invitation for folks that are listening. Find something that empowers you and lights you up, and move from that space. And I will say the professional ask is that if you like what you heard and you're curious, we have, CorselloButcheria.com. And also as a coach, if you're interested in knowing me a little bit more as a coach, KaseyCorsello.com. I'm happy to connect with folks just like you, because this is how we heal, we grow, we make this planet better through our connections. I absolutely agree with you.
I love it. Kasey, this was so much fun. It went by so fast.
It did.
It goes by so, like I tell people, like I go, all right, it's going to be like, 35, 45 minutes, maybe. It goes by so fast because you go into conversations where like, I want to know a little bit more about this and this and this. This is why I'm like, this is not the last. There's going to be so many more because we thought the pandemic was going to be a week or two. So I was going to do a few just to keep myself busy. And then I didn't know a full year later I would still be doing this. And I continue to do them because people keep saying no one else is giving us this much time. And I'm like, and as humans, we just want time together.
We do. And we also connect to stories, which I love. I really
We do.
appreciate you getting deep into the story because we've all got them.
I know you tried to surpass your entire life.
I totally did. I was like, what? Texas? No. Yeah. And then we connect, right?
And we connect. Oh my God. I know we have Italy in common because my mom, we have Texas because you were there. Come on, there's links. There's so much links. And you would never know that if we just walked in a room together, we started talking and then we walked away. You'd never know if I didn't ask a little bit more.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I mean, I really appreciate this and I look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you.
So the next time you're faced with fear, be curious about the possibilities that lie beyond the fear. Use curiosity as a way to empower you. And remember what my nephew said. When we do things we're afraid of, we might like them. Thank you.